So welcome to lesson 3 of this teaching series on game design and JavaScript. Now in this lesson, you're going to be adding custom images to your game rather than the CSS generated blocks that we've been using. So you could actually have your own image. You could create them yourselves if you're a graphic designer or if you feel confident with using graphic software, or you can get something from the internet which is copyright free. We're also going to add a bit more right-left movement and look at some of those skills, and also look at more sophisticated and more complex collision detection. So let's get started. So what do we want to achieve? As mentioned, in this video we're going to be adding custom images for the sky, for the character, for the enemy, etc. We'll also be looking at additional movement like left and right, and sophisticated collision. Now the character is not staying at the moment within the first few pixels on the x-axis, but in the current video, the lesson that we're doing now, you'll be able to move across, so back and forth on the screen. So that will change the nature of the collision detection that we have in place at the moment. A quick recap again. Remember our top and our left, and the fact that the 0 starts at the top here if we are referring to the y-axis. So if Super Mario moves down, he is now at top 500. If Super Mario moves to the right, he is at left 500. And it's just important to remember those variables because we'll be referring to them as we go ahead and code. Again, if you're confident with coding and just doing this by yourself, you might want to just pause the screen and update your HTML file. Your CSS, you can see it's a bit longer now. We've added a sky class there and a ground as well. And there's going to be 2 parts to the JavaScript. That's part 1. This is part 2. So at this point, let's come back to our code. I'm going to open up brackets. Open our folder. And I've got my 3 files. The index.html, the script, and the style. I'm going to just close that and make it fill up half the screen so I have a nice preview. And here we can see what we have so far, which is just moving on jump and an enemy colliding with this character with a game over feature. So what we want to do now is add some custom features, pictures, etc. to the game to make it more what you would expect. Now I'm going to do anything, but you can of course pick your own images and you can spend some time even making your own images. So let's have a look at how that's done. We're also going to have a sky and a ground. So we're going to give some divisions to this game, which is pretty simple at the moment. It just has a pink background. So we do that in the CSS. So if you go to the CSS file and somewhere within it, perhaps after these keyframes, I'm going to press enter. We're going to add the sky. And let's specify a width, maybe 500. As always, you can experiment with what works. For now, let's have a nice aquamarine sky. Not that a sky is aquamarine, but we'll do that for now. Background size. I'm going to say contain, and the position is going to be absolute. It's not moving around. Top. Where do we want this sky to begin? Now let me just experiment with that and see what happens. Okay. Now, in order for this to be actually rendered on the screen, we need to go back to our HTML. And where we have these divs, I'm going to add another one called sky. Oops. And you can see immediately that we have an aquamarine sky, which is a bit confusing, so I might go back and just make it maybe sky blue, I think. So sky blue. And of course we can do exactly the same thing, so if I just copy and paste that and add that for ground. Now it is important, the order that you have these divs in the HTML matters. So if you know that the sky or the character is going to be on top of everything, you'd need to have it at the bottom. So I would suggest that we move these divs around a bit. So I've put the sky up at the top, followed perhaps by the ground, and then we have the enemy, and then we have the character. So now let's go back to the style sheet and see what else we can do. So we can add a ground. Let's do a few things for the ground. Width, maybe again 500 pixels, which is filling up the canvas. Maybe an interesting color there. Position, of course we want absolute again. And you do need to specify the background size. Let's say it's going to be contained, and the top, where do we want it to start? So we have that. And don't forget the pixels, I tend to do that quite a bit. So we've got the ground and the sky. Save it all. I might go into the JavaScript and get rid of that alert so it doesn't keep happening. It's a bit annoying. And you can see something's happening. It's not exactly how we want it. But we've certainly got a division. Now, what I would like to show you now is, instead of, don't worry about the fact that that's not working. This is just showing you how you can just add divisions and you would have different colors. But what we really want is a background. So instead of having a color there, we would like a background. Now, over here, let's just check our whole animation. We've got the animate, we've got the character, and that's all looking good. So in the sky, we're going to change this background color and get commented out. And in fact, in the CSS, it's a different type of comment. To comment in the CSS, you add. Do that with a star. You can see it's all gone grey now, which means it's not going to work. So I star that out again with a backslash. So that's been commented out. And I'm going to instead add a background image. Just move that. So background image, and we put in a URL, and then we are going to find a background that we like, and make sure it's a JPEG file, which is good for the web. It loads quite easily, and we put it in there. And we're going to do the same thing with the ground. So let's check that. We have a width, we have a height, we have a background color, which for the purposes of now, let's just keep that simple. Background size, and a top where we want it to start. Great. So obviously we don't have anything turning up in the sky at the moment. Let's see that that's seems to have been changed somewhat. So let's make the character be slightly higher. Okay, and what we now need to do is actually find, so I'm going to open up a new tab here and find a nice background. Going Could be something like that, could be anything really, a nice sky, for instance, like that. And you right click it, save image as, and you save it in exactly the same folder that all your files are in. So I'm going to save it as exactly what I've called it there, which is background.jpg. It is already a JPEG, so I don't need to add the extension. And I save it in that folder, in the root directory. Now once I've done that, and I refresh, you can see immediately that my sky has been rendered on the page, which is quite nice. Now you're probably wondering why the ground is not being displayed. I've chosen this lovely brown colour and it's not being displayed. And this is quite useful to spot that I've spelt this with the English spelling, which is C-O-L-O-U-R, and actually in both HTML and CSS you need to be using the American spelling for colour, so C-O-L-O-R. And down here you can experiment with what will work. So for instance, maybe move it down the top a little bit, see what happens. There it fits sort of snugly in. It's not a very nice colour. Let's go quick edit, right click, quick edit, and I could perhaps change it to something, not really sure. So I'm just going to change it to that for now and leave it. But what we do have is we have a sky and we have a ground. And we have a character which is sort of the same colour as the ground, so I might change it slightly to maybe a darker green. Great. So we've got all these things, and don't worry about the position of the characters because we're going to add a few things to the CSS in a minute, which will change it around anyway, because we don't want this character to be a block, which is CSS generated, or the enemy to be this red blob. We want it to actually have a face and to look like something we want. So what I'm going to do again is find a character. Now, a useful thing to remember is, so I might type in, say, cartoon man. You can find copyright-free images by clicking on more. If I just move this across, tools, usage rights, and you could suggest that you are looking for something which is Creative Commons license, or for something which allows commercial use if you're doing it for commercial purposes. But for now, let's just do that. And I might want something which is transparent. Not all of these that say they're transparent are transparent, so you might have to shop around and see what works, but for now let's just pick something. So I'm going to pick that. It is on a... So I'll pick that, say save image, and I'm going to call it, again, save it as a JPEG image, and call it, let's call it Cartoon Man. I want to save it as a PNG or JPEG. So we can leave it, and then what you do is you go to your character, and where it says background color you get rid of it. So I'm just going to actually delete that background color which we took the trouble to change just now, and type in background image URL again, and cartoon man, I think it's JPEG, wasn't it? JPEG. Don't forget the semicolon at the end. So once you've done that, you need to do a few more things. Let's just play around with these settings a bit. Add a top 50%. Check that your position is relative. Save that. And you can see that the characters have disappeared. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So once we've done the character, we need to do exactly the same thing for the enemy. We need to get an enemy and replace the background color with background image URL, call it maybe enemy JPEG or anything like that, and don't forget the semicolon at the end, in the same way that we did for the top one. So I'm going to leave this. We're going to get rid of top and left here. and change we have a position relative, which is fine. I'll just change that to 50%. And we do need a background size, which I'll just put underneath here for easy readability. Saying it's being contained. So we've got our enemy and we've got our character. So let's just check through it. We've got a width, we've got a height, we've got a background image, a position which is relative, a top position in px, a background size we haven't specified, we've suggested that the position is relative and the top 50%. So now that we've got that, we can go back to our index, save all, and see, check out what's going on here. So if you find yourself in a position where you have clearly added things you think you have, cartoon, man, JPEG, and enemy. I haven't actually put this guy in the folder yet, but it's not rendering on the screen for some reason. A good idea is for you to actually check the folder. So if you open up the folder where everything is actually held, and you look into it, you'll see that the background, which is rendering correctly, is fine. It's called background JPEG, and that's what it is. But the cartoon man is a JFIF file, whatever that is. So we're going to have to either change this to that, or let's just edit for simplicity. I'm going to edit with paint, so I right-clicked and I edited. You can crop it and do whatever you like. I could add some, maybe I want him to have red hair or something. And then what you do is you save it, and this time you choose how you want to save it. So I would like it, let's call him CMan, and make sure it's a JPEG image. So I'm saving it in the root directory in the folder. So once that's been done, I can now see I have a CMan and it's in the right format. Let's delete cartoon man and let's change this to CMan. Save. And immediately you have your man. Now this doesn't look perfect. It's a bit repeating himself and it doesn't look like you would expect or want, and you can sort of edit that. You can play around with the different settings for the character, so we'll come back to that in a minute. But for now, let us quickly add an enemy as well. So I'm just going to get an enemy. It's coming up with sort of random things there. So what I might do for now is just use one that I've done earlier. I think we have this enemy. So let's use this cartoon man and enemy. We know they work. So I'm going to copy them into our folder. Get rid of that again and just change that to cartoon man. And we do have an enemy now. So if I refresh that, I just need to check that I do have an enemy. They're both PNG files now, so I need to change that to PNG, which take up a bit more space. Save all, and there we have it. Now this enemy is not particularly rendering in the position that we would expect, so again we're going to have to play around with that. And this guy is repeating himself as well. So let's look through what we might need to change. For one, I might need to change the width of the character. So let's change it to maybe 60. 60. Sometimes it doesn't change immediately. We've got the URL correct, the top position is fine, the border radius is not really relevant now because it's not being rendered by the CSS. And then for the enemy, perhaps we 50, 60 by 50 maybe. We don't need that. And he's bouncing. You can change this according to what you want. And of course, we want this guy to be moving across the screen. At the moment, all he does is he jumps, and it's not really colliding or detecting that at the moment because we've got the logic, but it's not working now because we've changed a couple of things. So what we're going to have to do next is add some functionality to this guy to make him move up and down. Now, at this point, you should be confident enough to look through the CSS and the animations and think about what you want. For instance, I can see for some reason it's bobbing up and down instead of having the arc kind of enemy movement that I wanted. And for that, I'm just going to change that to left and get rid of this, which should fix it. So again, we have the enemy moving across in that manner. Now what we now need is we want the man, this man over here, this character, to be moving across the screen. At the moment he can just sort of jump. He's not jumping very high. Again, something you could change. And I've removed the alert, so it's not telling me when the game is over. I want him to be able to move freely across the screen, or at least left and right. And this is going to teach you something about adding functions for that sort of thing. So if we go to the script file now, which is where we're adding the JavaScript, and I might just cover that over so we're not being annoyed by the enemy. And somewhere down here, or perhaps above the event listener, we're going to add a couple of other event listeners. So let me just move all that down so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to add another one. So moving left, we also have a jump up event listener, which we've already done. And we also want somewhere a right event listener. So you might be able to pause the screen and do this yourself if you feel confident. And remember, try and use the autocorrect so you don't make mistakes. And you do exactly the same thing that you did for the other one, just basically copying the code there. And I'm going to type in E, and this time we're looking up a different ASCII character, which is for the left arrow, which it happens to be 37. Just look up the ASCII table, and if that key is down, that is the left key is down, we would like to call the left function. So let's do exactly the same thing for the right, but this time we have if E key code is equal to 39, which is the key code for the right arrow, and of course we'd like to call the right function. So we've done some event listeners down there. We can now leave these alone for a minute and go ahead back up to the top of our code. So we have a jump function that we did. We've got a var checked dead, which is a set interval function, which is doing most of the exciting things here. But somewhere we're going to have to add a right function and a left function. And I'm going to do that right under the jump function here. So function right, I'm going to declare a variable which is left value, and here, like we did in the previous video, we want to get the property value, And we do that by typing in this code here for the character, and we get their property value, and get the left property value. And remember, we want this value to be an integer, so we type in parseInt, open brackets, close brackets at the end, which means we get an integer value. Now, at this point, we have this function, and we've got a variable called left value, which we're trying to get there, and we're trying to basically say, let's add a comment there, if we're going to add an if function to stop going out of the right wall. Now, we know that if the player, currently, if it just sort of, you keep pressing the right function, it'll keep going off the right wall. We don't want that. So we're going to have if left values. Remember, an if function, you put in the condition in between these brackets. And if that is less than something, say 450, you know that your canvas size is a particular size. Then if it goes off that, or if it's before that, we want to do something. And here in this case, we are adding some pixels to the character. So you're going to do a very similar thing for the left function. And you might be able to just do this yourself if you're catching up and you're getting the hang of it. But of course, it's going to be a left function. We're still getting the left value, and we're still getting computed property value left. But this time we're trying to say if the left value is greater than 0. And you can think about what you think this is doing. We want to, instead of add 30 pixels, we minus 30 pixels. So we've got these left and right functions sorted out now. Now, at this point, we need to add something a bit more complicated to our existing set interval function. So here we have, let's get rid of all these comments, which are not necessary now. So we've got our set interval function, and we have a slightly different situation from what we had before, because if I move this, we now know that our character is not just moving left and right, or up or down, he's also moving left and right. And if he's moving left and right, the whole function for collision is going to have to be slightly different. First of all, let me just go down here and make sure these are correctly done. So now the reason our character is only moving up and down is possibly down to some tiny mistakes. I can see over here, for instance, that I've written if left val. So the name of my variable is var left val, but I've referred to it here with a small v, which is not helpful at all. So in every situation where I've done that, I'm going to have to go and check. And what you now have is a character, as you can see, which is moving left and right. And if it collides with this hideous enemy, which it's not doing at the moment, the game is over. So we've got that working, and we now need to add some more sophisticated collision detection, as mentioned, because our character isn't just moving up and down, it's also moving left and right, which means the position of the collision is going to have to be adjusted or rethought. So let's go back to our set interval function here and consider what we need to do. So I could just, in fact, get rid of, close that down like that. So I could get rid of all of it and code it again so we can consider what we're doing. So we've got our check dead set to the set interval function here. and remember that always ends with that. And I'm going to declare some more variables. You can also use let instead of var. And that's the enemy position now. So I'm going to say in exactly the same way that we did for the other ones, but using a different method for enemy, which JavaScript provides, which is getBoundingClientRectangle. Now this is a very clever little method. It tells you it returns a text rectangle object that encloses a group of text rectangles. Now don't worry what it means, but really what it will do for us is it will give us the left, the right, the top and the bottom positions of the enemy. So we've got that. I'm going to have another one for the character position. I'm going to use this same getBoundingClientRectangle. And again, what this is going to do is it's going to give us the left, the right, the top and the bottom positions of the character. And then once we've got those once we've got those, we are ready to add some sort of if function here. So we're going to put in the brackets our condition. I'm going to say if the enemy position and the bottom of the enemy position is less than the top, two lines like that, and we're going to say bottom. Then we want something to happen again, so we have a function within a function, so to speak. And if that is not happening, we want an else statement, which is going to be removing the animation. Okay, so this is removing the animation again. Similar to what we did in the previous video, if you remember. Here we can have a nice alert which says game over, and I'm just going to say location reload so it does that for us automatically. Now down here we failed to do, just make sure we've got all the right curly braces closed at the right positions. We forgot the interval, so we close that, and don't forget the semicolon at the end. If I was to save that and now go back to our code, move my guy around, jump, or actually move him over here, let's see what happens there. So it's not, well, it's doing something, but it doesn't seem to be working in exactly the way we want. It's definitely moving around, it's definitely colliding, it's definitely doing something. Let's try and jump, right, but it's not very smooth. And now this is quite exciting at this point. You understand some of the skills, you've written code to get it working to this point, and now you need to think about smooth functioning game flow, different variables that you can change to get it working just right. So that's something I'd leave you with to see what you can do. And of course the finished code for a complete project with errors corrected, you can download from here as well. Now here's one working copy of this very simple game at the moment. So it moves left and right. I can jump up. The moment I collide quite neatly with this character like that, it will say game over. So see if you can get it working like that. And as I mentioned, if you can't, you can just download the code and analyze it for yourself. So in the next lesson, we're going to be looking at the famous game Flappy Birds. And in just one single lesson, we're going to be recreating Flappy Birds, which is a game that apparently made up to $50,000 a day from in-app adverts and sales. It took him several days to make and actually come up with the graphics and also put it on the App Store. We're going to recreate it in a single lesson. Of course, it might take you a few more lessons if you want to adapt it and work on the graphics and make it a bit more complicated. So that is coming up next lesson, and hopefully all the skills that you've learned, you'll be able to practice again. Now, some of this might be quite complex, and some of you might be thinking, I have no idea what she was talking about, especially in the collision detection. You're going to have to go back over it. You're going to have to draw it out, maybe for yourself, where you draw the computer coordinate system and you have a little bird or you have a character, and think about what you're trying to do in plain English, in pseudocode, write it out. And then you can translate that into JavaScript that you're coding for collision detection or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So as you do that, and as you get practice, and as you make your own things and sort of work on something that you are trying to bring to life, this will become more and more simple. But it does take work and it does take practice.